Last week, brothel workers at Sherry's Ranch in Pahrump announced plans to unionize, a groundbreaking move in Nevada. So today on CityCast Las Vegas, we talk with Kate Reynolds of the Nevada Independent about what's behind this effort and what they're up against. And coming up in the second segment, we hear from Sherry's Ranch worker Adelind Gray, who says she was wrongfully terminated after supporting the union. It's Wednesday, February 18th. I'm Sonia Cho Swanson, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. So, Kate, you broke the story of the unionization efforts at Sherry's Ranch in Pahrump. What's going on over there? Why do they want to unionize?
So this is a huge deal in labor history. It's the first time in U.S. history that sex workers have attempted to unionize. It's also a highly specific Nevada issue, given that Nevada is the only state where sex work is legal.
Just to clarify, when you say the first time sex workers have, you mean actual kind of like courtesans, brothel workers. There have been strippers who've attempted to unionize before.
Yeah, there have been two successful unionization efforts by strippers, both at strip clubs in California, but sex workers as in
brothel
legal,
workers.
brothel workers, sometimes known as prostitutes, but legal sex workers. And this probably wouldn't have ever happened unless a contract that the brothel, which is called Sherry's Ranch, it's in Pahrump, that Sherry's Ranch management presented its sex workers with a new contract in December, which was the impetus for this effort. Because that contract gave the brothel wide control over the intellectual property rights of the sex workers.
Interesting.
Basically gave the brothel perpetual, worldwide, kind of unmitigated rights to control the name, image, and likeness of the sex workers while they're on the Sherry's Ranch campus. What that means is that a lot of the sex workers that work at these brothels also are kind of adult film actresses or they're content creators online. And a lot of the content that they create is made while they're living in the rooms on the brothel and living on the property of the brothel.
We're talking about OnlyFans and things like that, right?
Yeah. So if you're an OnlyFans actress and you're also a sex worker and you create an OnlyFans film or video while living on the brothel, Sherry's Ranch wanted control to the money that you make from that video. And that was not normal in brothel contracts and hadn't been part of the contract before. And so that kind of inspired this frustration with management to begin with.
That intellectual property clause is just fascinating to me. I'm really curious how that, in your mind, reflects the changing nature of sex work in 2026.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a huge deal for the sex workers at this brothel. There aren't that many sex workers that work legally in the U.S. You know, a lot of sex work happens, the majority of sex work even in Nevada happens illegally, but for the few legal brothels in Nevada, I would say probably most sex workers that work at legal brothels in Nevada also make separate kind of money and separate income from something like OnlyFans or adult porn films and what have you. And that is kind of the new frontier in our online and digital age, is that a lot of sex work happens, or sex work adjacent fields kind of happens online. And so it's, if you sign away your intellectual property rights, if you're a sex worker, you're probably signing away the majority of your income to whatever content you're creating while living on your brothel.
And your story from the Nevada Independent, which, by the way, bravo for breaking this incredible piece of news. You also mentioned AI being a concern for sex workers.
Yeah. So one of the things that the union organizers that I spoke to were so worried about, and one of the reasons why this intellectual property clause created this like groundbreaking effort, because it was such a big deal to them, is that the contract is very explicit that the control that Sherry's Ranch will have over these women's name, image, and likeness is forever and is totally out of their power. So Sherry's Ranch could theoretically create AI-generated likenesses of these women because they've signed away their intellectual property rights. So they could be featured in an AI-generated video with their bodies and their faces.
Wow.
They could, a sex worker could decide to leave the sex work industry and her name, image, and likeness is still owned in part by Sherry's Ranch. So it really gives them
forever, in perpetuity?
In perpetuity. So one of the sex workers that I spoke to was saying, I could be dead and 50 years later, they could still be making money off of my image by selling t-shirts with my face on it or by making AI generated videos, which is separately this huge kind of unregulated dark space in both sex work and online kind of adult films, but also just in society in general. So it's this huge concern for women that are kind of already putting their images and videos online in this more kind of sensitive and vulnerable way. And now to kind of have those intellectual property rights signed away would be a huge deal for their financial future.
Wow. Okay, so what exactly is one of the central challenges to this unionizing efforts? I mean, is the brothel really putting their, feet down and saying no chance?
So the barrier to the unionization effort is not up to the brothel. It's up to the Federal Labor Relations Board, the National Labor Relations Board, which determines whether or not these women have the right to unionize. So sex workers are currently or have always been classified as independent contractors. They're considered to run their own businesses through the brothel's kind of property and under the auspices of the brothel, but they're not considered full-time employees of the brothel.
Because they rent. Is that the idea that you sort of rent their spot? Sort of like a salon worker or something, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's like sex workers, they live on brothel property for 1 to 3 weeks, but they rent rooms while they're living on the property. So the brothel has said these women are independent contractors. They run businesses, they run services through our property, but we're not their managers. We have no requirement to provide them with a minimum wage or with like health insurance or whatever. And so that is the barrier to this unionization effort. The union organizers, they say they have the majority of support from the brothel workers. So it's not about getting a majority vote. It's about getting them legally classified as the kind of labor unit that would be allowed to collectively bargain in the first place.
As employees, is that kind of
as full-time employees.
What would some of the pros and cons be of being classified as employees? Is that kind of, I don't know, all rainbows and kittens and idyllic future?
Yeah, a lot of it is theoretical at this point because it's not been done before by sex workers at brothels. So what the implications are, it's sort of wide-ranging and a little bit unknown. But the sex workers that are pushing for the unionization say that they basically are already full-time employees because even though they only live on the brothel for these shorter periods of times, like a number of weeks, and even though they rent rooms while on the brothel's campus, the brothel does have a large degree of control and power over their activities while they're living there. So the brothel confiscates their laptops and monitors their email accounts, takes half of their tips from their sessions with clients. So the sex workers are saying, we basically already are full-time employees, but we have none of the kind of autonomy that you get from being able to collectively bargain, which is why they've now been served with this contract that they describe as really, really punitive and kind of, going well beyond what their normal expectations as a sex worker would be. On the brothel's end, though, the brothel says that having sex workers be classified as independent contractors gives them a sort of like flexibility and autonomy that they need in a highly sensitive industry. So, women who work as sex workers can determine what clients they get, can determine what rate they charge those clients, and also don't have to live on the brothel for the full year. They can come on when they're free to or when they are desiring to. And so the brothel says that all of those kind of contracts and clauses are things that result from them being kind of independent businesses and independent contractors rather than full-time employees.
Oh, wait. So back up here for a second. You're saying that they get to choose their clients. Would the implication then be that, I guess, if they were full-time employees under, say, federal anti-discrimination laws, they wouldn't be able to refuse someone of a specific gender or sex, for example, or I don't know, a creepy customer who gives them the wrong vibes, or somebody who looks exactly like, I don't know, an abusive ex or something, right?
That's a really, really good question. And I had one source reach out to me and say, this is a potential implication, is that if these sex workers are classified as full-time employees, it'll give them kind of collective bargaining rights, but it also might give their brothel more power to determine what type of work they do, which could, in an industry like sex work, be a slippery slope in terms of what they're expected to do, what they're required to do. It's unclear if it would be harder or easier for a full-time employee to refuse services, right? So if you have like a set contract with your boss, you're expected to get that work done every day. Can you just refuse to do certain services if you're a full-time employee? It's kind of unclear. And so if you're a sex worker and that's like a really, really like loaded kind of area of work and labor already, if you're considered a full-time employee, like what are your new kind of rights when it comes to meeting with clients or determining who your clients are or determining how long you spend with clients, how much you charge them. So it's totally unclear, and it's just never been done before. So I think it's going to be a really interesting issue to watch if their unionization effort succeeds.
Yeah. And then what are the, I guess, implications for labor law broadly? Because now my mind is going to other industries that are also contract workers but have tried to, I mean, are there examples of other industries that have tried to shift from contract workers to full-time employees?
Yeah, so independent contractors is like that classification is one of the most controversial kind of areas of labor law right now, in part because independent contractors are sort of getting more common. Like many kind of businesses are trying to
well, Uber, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
Uber is like the most kind of notable example is that Uber drivers are considered independent contractors. Uber says, these are people that are running like independent kind of taxi businesses through their car, and it just happens to be under like the guise of the Uber logo. And there have been some states, California and Massachusetts, which have moved to actually grant independent contractors the right to unionize, even though they're not full-time employees, which is different. So it's not, independent contractors are still considered independent contractors, but in certain states, they now have these plausible collective bargaining rights. There have been other industries that have tried to, and companies where independent contractors have tried to lobby and say, no, we are full-time employees. And that's just like a question that's determined by the federal labor relations authorities, and is very, very circumstance specific about how much power people have over their jobs and how much time they spend at their jobs and, all these kind of labor questions.
Yeah. So it sounds like this fight could have potentially implications nationally for a number of industries and not just sex work.
Yeah, and it's especially not only because of the independent contractor classification, but also because of this intellectual property clause. So I'd say like a highly kind of similar industry is student athletes at huge universities who
name, image, likeness.
Exactly. Their name, image, likeness is already owned by their like college or university, right? They now get compensated for it, but it was always controlled by like their management. But there have been recent cases in the last like year or so where student athletes at big universities are now considered full-time employees. So they're no longer kind of just independent contractors. They're now like considered to be these employees that have the right to unionize. And you actually saw like Dartmouth's men's basketball team unionized last year based on being classified as full-time employees. So there's a lot of like, if this sort of effort succeeds, which is like the stakes of which are, independent contractors right now, but independent contractors in an industry where their employers have so much control over their lives when they're living on the brothel, that they successfully argue and petition to become full-time employees. That not only is a huge deal in labor law, but it also means that they are protecting themselves against this intellectual property clause, which has huge implications kind of worldwide for what rights we afford people that are content creators and what rights we afford people that are social media kind of influencers.
Right. Well, Kate, what happens next?
So the next kind of step is hearing from a federal labor relations authority about whether or not these women are considered independent contractors or full-time employees. If they're considered full-time employees, then the unionization effort proceeds from there. The women have already kind of secured sponsorship and support from the Communications Workers of America, which is a union that's like affiliated with the AFL-CIO. So assuming that they can be classified as full-time employees, the efforts would proceed relatively like straightforward from there. I do think, I at least, if the efforts do succeed, will be watching other kind of sex work adjacent industries very closely, like strip clubs and sort of adult film actresses, to see if like similar efforts would pick up steam in those sex work areas of like, okay, these sex workers got classified as full-time employees, and now they have this right to collectively bargain. Could the same thing happen to us at a strip club in Las Vegas? So I think that's like one interesting thing that could happen after they potentially succeed, but it all depends on what that classification is. Any
word on when that decision will be coming down?
No, I'm not sure yet.
All right. Well, I know you'll be watching this story, and Kate, please keep us posted.
I will, of course. It's a really interesting story, so yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on CityCast Las Vegas, Kate.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
After the break, we talk with Adeline Gray, who claims she was terminated from Sherry's Ranch for union activity. So stick around for that conversation. step into the movies with the Neon Museum's new movie tour in the heart of Las Vegas. Take a guided walk through real neon backdrops that have actually appeared in some of Hollywood's most memorable scenes over the decades. Your tour starts in the iconic La Concha Motel lobby, which is now the Neon Museum's visitor center, and a key setting in Scorsese's film Casino. Stand where Robert De Niro and Sharon Stone filmed their romantic evening as Ace and Ginger, and then wander the world-famous neon boneyard surrounded by vintage marquees and historic signs. Plus, you'll connect neon landmarks to films like Casablanca, Superman, and The Joe Louis Story. Relive the comedy of Vegas Vacation as you walk among signs tied to Chevy Chase's classic. You'll hear insider stories and fun trivia that bring these movie moments to life and capture unforgettable photos. So join fellow cinephiles on a one-of-a-kind tour that turns the Neon Museum into your own movie set. Check out the Neon Museum's new movie tour and discover how Las Vegas earned its reputation as the entertainment capital of the world through film. All right, welcome back. We have Adalind Gray, a former worker at Sherry's Ranch, here with us. Adalind, welcome to CityCast Las Vegas.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you here. I've been reading about, your fight, and you have this amazing video up on social media, on your Instagram. You said that you have absolute proof that you were terminated due to union activity. Can you break down what happened for us?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely can. And I am very sad about the whole situation. But initially, when I showed up Tuesday morning on February 10th, they told us that any ladies who hadn't signed the new contract yet would have to this tour. And I went ahead and checked in with our organizing chat, which is where we got union instructions that we would have the ability to sign UD under our signature, which stands for under duress.
Oh, UD. Okay.
And then that would protect us with the union as we were signing these. And within minutes of me starting to do that, I got called into the office over the intercom. I walked in and they told me, hey, we were informed that you will be signing the contract with under duress, and we have to let you know that we won't be accepting the contract. You have to either sign without or pack your bins and leave.
Wow.
And at that point, I didn't really know what to do. But I knew that I couldn't sign that contract as is. So I very cooperatively and politely went ahead and left. And at that point, it was voluntary. But then I sat in my car with my stuff in my car, and I was just talking to people about what had just happened. And I forgot to mention that during that conversation where they were telling me to pack my bags and leave, I pulled out my phone and started recording. And I had a few of these things repeated to me while I was recording. And I put that short video, it's less than a minute long, in the chat so they could see. And they told me that because I just got that on video and proved that it was, in fact, under duress, that if I wanted, I could go back and ask to just go ahead and sign the contract if I wanted to still work. Because I do like working at Sherry's. I'm supposed to be there right now. So I went ahead and politely asked if that would be okay. And it took me about an hour before I was able to get a response from somebody. And that's when Dina, our madam, came out and she said, well, because you were recording without consent, which goes against everything we stand for, unfortunately your contract is no longer on the table. And there's a few things that I just need to, really get out of the way on how ridiculous that is, because, well, Nevada is a one-party consent law as far as recording in-person conversations, so I definitely didn't break any laws. And also, that office that I recorded that in is already recording everything with cameras and audio. So I didn't record anything they didn't also already have.
And just to clarify, I think Nevada is a one-party consent state for in-person conversations, but not for telephone calls. But this was in person. This is in person.
Yeah. Yes. So I did get the recording of Dina telling me that too. And yeah, what I was expecting was going to happen was they were either going to let me back in or they were going to say, no, you made your choice, goodbye. But I didn't expect them to like make something up. And that was really upsetting because it just felt like a further betrayal of the relationship that I have formed working there.
What is the impact to your income by missing out on however many weeks that you were planning to be at Sherry's Ranch?
Well, I'm thankful that I'm going to be fine. Yeah, I mean, I am missing out on quite a bit of cash, but a big part of my career is always been online.
Okay.
I've been doing adult entertainment for the past 5 years, whether it's in a studio or on my own OnlyFans, which is actually part of the reason why I could not sign that contract, because what that contract was asking for was, well, a few things, but the big two were ownership of all of our intellectual property and handing over our complete power of attorney.
Not creepy at all. Yeah, who doesn't want to give your employer complete power of attorney?
Exactly. And it's like, if I were to give them ownership of all my intellectual property, that would mean they would own my name, my entire likeness, all of my like pictures that I have taken of myself, all of my content, even my band, the music I've written for my band, they could argue that they've owned. And while this would like not legally hold up in court, it's still just completely egregious.
I want to go back to this intellectual property piece, because you said that like you're lucky that a large portion of your income comes from your IP, the stuff that you do online, your photos, your videos, all of that. Is that true for a lot of brothel workers these days? Like, how much of a brothel worker's income do you think comes from their own IP these days?
In general, I haven't been working at Sherry's for super long, so I haven't experienced this yet. But in general, the consensus is that the potential to be made at Sherry's, it dwarfs content creation. But yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody.
Okay, so Sherry's is kind of like a short-term, big chunk of money, whereas the online content creation is like smaller amounts, but more steady over time.
I think that could be generally true, but that is such like a vast scope.
Okay, yeah, everyone's different. Everyone has different accounts.
For sure, yeah.
One of the arguments that the reporter we talked to, Kate Reynolds, brought up, a source came forward and told her, is that being an employee could actually potentially be worse for sex workers because you would have potentially less option to pick and choose which clients you necessarily have to like serve, for example. Does that ring true for you? Is that something that you're worried about?
Definitely not worried about that. I know employee is often a dirty word in the sex work industry, but in our case, there has been a lot of evidence that we're already treated as employees and that there's going to have to be a misclassification investigation in the unionizing process. But being an employee is actually not a bad thing for us. It's something that's commonly used as an intimidation tactic because they'll tell you like, oh, you won't be able to choose your clients, you won't be able to choose your rates. But in our case, with a union, that just gives us the power to negotiate our contract. So we can still have all of those things in our contract.
I see.
Like, we can choose our clients, we can set our own rates. So that's all it really comes down to in this context.
Okay, so I want to take us into the realm of like speculation here. Hypothetically, in our like utopic, sex den of the sci-fi future, what does a unionized brothel look like, sound like, feel like? What is this worker-led brothel of our dreams?
I don't want to get too deep into things we don't know, but I do know for sure that when I'm back working at Sherry's and when the other ladies are back there too, the ranch is going to be better than ever before, and we already loved working there. So we are going to put an end to wage theft, which is a common thing there. That is something that we previously have not been in a position to fight because it's so standard across all of the legal houses in Nevada, where there's often a pretty excessive limo fee, which is when a client will be told that the limo is free, but they will just take an excessive amount of income off of our paycheck
to pay for the limo that the client didn't pay for.
Exactly. And I used to rationalize this because I thought that money was going to the driver. But then I found out, at least in Sherry's case, it often just goes directly to the ranch. With the exception for if they take an Uber, then they take 10%, and then it does go to the driver.
Wow.
But in that case, if a client takes a limo, if we do the math, we end up walking away with only 33% of the cost of that party.
Oh my gosh.
They also take 50% of all our tips, which is just outright illegal. So this is just something that was so standard across all of the ranches that we accepted it because we had the privilege of doing this job without legal repercussions. But now we are in a position to say something about it. So that will be being fixed in the future.
Okay, so what do you hope happens next? What do you think like the next steps are to get towards this better version of the ranch?
I know things are going to be moving a little bit slower now. We have been putting a lot of pressure on Sherry's to just do the right thing without so much of a fight. But people can help by going to unitedbrothelworkers.org and signing the petition. There will be a GoFundMe to donate to for mutual aid. And we are working on merch, which we are really excited about. So Those are all ways to support us directly.
What's your favorite piece of merch so far?
Oh, man, I'm really looking forward to mugs. But
love a
none
good
of
mug.
them, yeah. I really love our logo. We put a lot of love into it, so. But yeah, I'm not sure the exact next steps, but I have a lot of faith in our union, a lot of faith in Jupiter Jetson for having led this movement, and I'm ready to stand with everybody.
Adeline, before we close, do you want to shout out your band?
Oh, my band, we're in the very early stages of everything, but we are hoping to have something released this year. We're called Lies for Attention. I would call us indie grunge or something along those lines. But it's my baby, and I'm excited for it to grow.
All right, Lies for Attention, coming soon to a Vegas venue near you. Adeline, thank you so much for coming on CityCast Las Vegas today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. Don't forget, you can support this show and get some great perks by becoming a CityCast Las Vegas neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.